We're a couple minutes late. All right, we are live. Hello, friends. We have a few people who've already said hello. Jayanta, Luisa, Wasabi, Karuna, Catherine, welcome all. We'll give it another couple minutes for people to come in, then we'll get started. The sutta, first sutta we're going to be going over is in the description or in the chat now. Hello, Yankee, Mary, Manal. So we are going to be continuing the theme from yesterday, the sutta that we covered last night, what should be cultivated and what should not be cultivated. So we are going to be going over other suttas that give practical advice and practical techniques to put into practice yourself so that you can work with the mind. We're going to be doing Majjhima Nikaya number 19, which is two kinds of thought, Veda Vitakka Sutta. And then we're going to be doing number 20. So these two, there's a reason why they're right next to each other in the suttas, which is removal of distracting thoughts. That's the typical translation of it. Welcome, Metika, Janaki, and Kim. And Jason. All right, I think we can get started. So this sutta is a very important sutta to me, and it's one that I tend to emphasize a lot. The reason being is because I remember years and years ago, I don't know how many years ago now, when I first read this sutta, I was like, oh, I can start doing this right now. And I did. And I still do it to this day. Now, probably like 15 years or so later. And this sutta is wonderful in terms of understanding what is arising in the mind and what to do about it. So let's start reading this sutta here, two kinds of thought. Hello, Amaranta. Welcome. At one time, the Buddha was staying near Savatthi in Jeta's Grove, Anathapindika's monastery. There, the Buddha addressed the mendicants. Mendicants, venerable sir, they replied. The Buddha said this, mendicants, before my awakening, when I was still unawakened, but intent on awakening, I thought. So when he was a bodhisattva. So this is one of those suttas. Another one of those suttas is Majjhima Nikaya number 4, fear and dread. This is one of those suttas where the Buddha is telling you, this is how I trained before I became awakened. Okay? So when you see a sutta like that, that's a sutta to pay attention to. Well, they all are, but these especially, because the Buddha is telling you, well, this is what I did. See if it works for you. Hello, Kumu, welcome. So I thought, why don't I meditate by continually dividing my thoughts into two classes? So I assigned sensual, malicious, and cruel thoughts to one class, and I assigned thoughts of renunciation, goodwill, and harmlessness to the second class. And I mentioned this a little bit yesterday. We saw this in the sutta yesterday. This is right samma sankappo, right act, right intention or right thought. This is the second factor of the Noble Eightfold Path. So the Buddha is judging and observing. Maybe I shouldn't say judging because that has all kinds of connotations and gets us all into suffering. But the Buddha is understanding, clarifying, discriminating between two kinds of thought. Thought that is samma sankappo, right intention or right thought, and thought that is micca sankappo, thought that is wrong intention, wrong thought. So this is the major division here. So right now, you can start observing your mind. You can start observing what arises in the mind. You can start judging. You can start discriminating. Is this thought from here or is this thought from there? Right? So this is just the beginning. The Buddha continues on. So I assigned sensual, malicious, and cruel thoughts. So the words here, nekama sankapo, for right thought or right intention. This is a thought of letting go, usually translated as renunciation. This is not talking about being a monastic here. This is thoughts of letting go of things, not being covetous, right? As we saw in the sutta yesterday, not grasping, not clinging, right? Developing thoughts that allow you to let go. Thoughts of goodwill, thoughts of metta, as opposed to ill will. And thoughts of harmlessness, avihingsa, that you live with rod laid down. You do not wish to harm any other beings. These are the three aspects of right thought or right intention. Hello, Kumu and Usha. Welcome. So I assigned sensual, malicious, and cruel thoughts to one class, and I assigned thoughts of renunciation, goodwill, and harmlessness to the second class. So again, he's saying there are these kind of thoughts, that kind of thoughts. This is why it's literally called Dvaita Vitakka, two kinds of thoughts. Then as I meditated, hello Joseph, welcome. Then as I meditated, diligent, keen, and resolute. These three are very important. You see these in Satipatthana. Right? The Buddha is, whenever the Buddha is talking about somebody who is really, honestly, sincerely meditating well, they are doing it diligent, keen, and resolute. So these three words here are very important. Right? So this is not, as I'm just flippantly doing whatever. Right? You're actually you are doing this activity with mindfulness, with clear comprehension, sati sampajanya. Right? You are doing this activity clearly understanding and aware. Then as I meditated, diligent, keen, and resolute, a sensual thought arose. I understood. This sensual thought has arisen in me. So this is very important word. Pajan, this one, this here is pajanami, but again, this word is also seen in Satipatthana, the foundations of mindfulness, pajanati. This means to know something experientially deeply. Right? You see it very clearly. You understand it very well. Now, for most of us, especially if we're new to the practice, we're not really going to be able to be very good at that. Right? We might have like fleeting bits of pajanati, fleeting bits of sati sampajanya, where we have this clarity. It's like, oh, I see this. And then we go back to being our old dull selves after that. Because our mind is not sharp, our mind is not trained. But as you do this practice over and over and over again, over years, then your mind becomes sharp. Your mindfulness becomes sharp. One of the similes is like a sharp knife that cuts through delusion. So you understand, you can see this easily. This is a sensual thought that has arisen in me, and you reflect on it. It leads to hurting myself, to hurting others, or hurting both. So think about that, right? This thought arises in me. Use an example of anger. Anger has arisen in me. If I were to act out of this anger, I will most likely do something that is unskillful, that is harmful to myself and others, and both. So why don't I not act out of that anger? So it leads to the hurting of both. It blocks wisdom. It's on the side of anguish. And it doesn't lead to extinguishment. It doesn't lead to nibbana, awakening. When I reflected that it leads to hurting myself, it went away. When I reflected that it leads to hurting others, it went away. When I reflected that it leads to hurting both, it went away. When I reflected that it blocks wisdom, it's on the side of anguish and doesn't lead to extinguishment, it went away. So this is a very important thing. This is something you can see in your own mind, in your own experience. 9 times out of 10, just observing an unskillful thought or an unskillful impulse is enough to have it be abandoned. Just being mindful enough to see it is usually enough. When it's not, that's what the next sutta is all about. And if we have time, the other set of suttas in the Anguttara Nikaya that we might cover is also about when it's not. Right, so this is why these 2 suttas are together, so that you can, they're both basically for the same thing, the same practice, but the second one is going to be, as you'll see, for when you recognize it and it's too strong. It doesn't go away, which will also happen. But in the suttas, especially in the Tara and Terigatas, these are the verses of the elder bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, you'll see like there'll be a bhikkhu or bhikkhuni will be meditating in the woods, and Mara will come and try to like whisper in their ear and tempt them or trick them. And they will say, "I see you, Mara." And then it says, Mara, sad and dejected, goes away. Right? So that's what this is. When you are mindful enough to see that Mara has arisen, almost always, Mara just goes away. Because guess what? You're in your domain. Your domain is mindfulness. Mara can't touch you in the domain of mindfulness. And this is the simile of the quail. So when you are mindful, clearly comprehending, Mara is dejected. So naturally it goes away. Now what will happen is 5 minutes later, Mara will come at a different angle with a different attack. He'll do another flank, right? He'll have another set of justifications. He'll have another thing. So you have to be constantly, this is why when you're meditating diligently, ardently, and resolute, right? You are on guard for these to arise in your mind. You're on guard for the attacks of Mara. So you understand this. So the Buddha says, I gave up, got rid of, and eliminated any sensual thoughts that arose. Hello, Joseph and Sud. Welcome. So here again, these words, got rid of, eliminated any sensual thoughts that arose. It should be understood here that the Buddha is not talking about what we'll see in the next sutta. The very last, utter last resort before doing something very unskillful. Like you're about to kill somebody or rape somebody or whatever, is to crush mind with mind, right? So the Buddha is not saying here, I'm forcibly eliminating this. That's not what he means. It means you have observed it and you've let it go. And it has no power. It goes away. That's what the Buddha is talking about here. Then I meditated, diligent, keen, and resolute. A malicious thought arose. A cruel thought arose. And it's the same thing. I understood this leads to hurting myself and others. When I reflected on it, it went away. When I reflected that it hurts others and myself, it blocks wisdom, etc., I gave it up. Now, this is a very important statement. You might have seen this in your classroom growing up. Right? The Buddha probably said it first. Whatever a mendicant frequently thinks about and considers becomes part of the mind's inclination. What you think, you become. This is why we are abandoning unskillful thoughts and intentions and developing skillful thoughts and intentions. This is why we are abandoning the unskillful, developing the skillful, that which should be developed, that which should not be developed, our right effort. Whatever a mendicant frequently thinks about and considers becomes the inclination of the mind. You should print that out and put it on a card and have it always with you. You reflect on, oh, I'm allowing these thoughts to be in my mind and it's causing suffering. Why don't I abandon those things? Or try to abandon them. Not always so easy. But anyway, continuing on. If they often think about and consider sensual thoughts, they've given up thoughts of renunciation to cultivate sensual thought. Their mind's inclined towards sensual thought. If they often think about malicious thoughts, their mind inclines towards malicious thoughts, giving up thoughts of goodwill. If they often think about cruel thoughts, their mind inclines towards cruel thoughts and abandons non-cruelty. Suppose it's the last month of the rainy season, when the crops grow closely together, and a cowherd must take care of the cattle. He'd tap and poke them with his staff on this side and that to keep them in check. Why is that? For he sees that if they wander into the crops, he would be executed, imprisoned, fined, and condemned. So this is a person is very mindful to make sure that all his cattle, all his sheep or whatever, are where they're supposed to be. All the ducks are in a row. Right? Because if not, then it harms other people's, other farmers and things like that. He can get really punished for it. In the same way, I saw that unskillful qualities have the drawbacks of corruption, and that skillful qualities have the benefit of and cleansing power of renunciation. Then as I meditated, diligent, keen, and resolute, a thought of renunciation arose in me. Then I understood this thought of renunciation has arisen in me. It doesn't lead to hurting myself, hurting others, or hurting both. It nourishes wisdom. It's on the side of freedom from anguish, and it leads to extinguishment. Hello, Miguel. Hola, from Chile. We just had a monastic from Chile here a couple weeks ago. All right. If I were to keep thinking on considering this all night and all day and all day and all night, I see no danger that would come from it. So the Buddha is saying, this is a skillful thought. This is samma sankappo. This is right thought. I could think this all day and no evil, no bad would come from it. So that's the other opposite end. That's an important thing to reflect on. Still, thinking and considering for too long would tire my body. And when my body is tired, the mind is stressed. So the Buddha is saying, even still, I could think about this all day, but still, I probably shouldn't. It would tire my body and my mind. And when my mind is stressed, it's hard. It's far from samadhi. It's far from stillness and concentration. So I stilled, settled, and unified and immersed my mind internally. Why is that? That my mind would not be stressed. And then as I meditated, a thought of goodwill, a thought of harmless arose, and the same thing over. I saw that no harm would come from it, but thinking too much would tire my body. So I'm just skipping through a lot of the repetition here. And then the same section again. Whatever a mendicant frequently thinks about and considers becomes their inclination of their mind. If they often think about thoughts of renunciation, thoughts of goodwill, thoughts of harmlessness, they've given up the opposite ends. They've given up the miccha sankapo. Suppose it's the last month of summer when all the crops have been gathered within a village, and the cowherd must take care of the cattle. While at the root of the tree in the open, he need only be mindful that the cattle are there. In the same way, I need only be mindful that those things were there. My energy was roused up and unflagging. My mindfulness was established and lucid. My body was tranquil and undisturbed, and my mind was immersed in samadhi. Quite skilled, secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unskillful qualities, I entered, remained in the first jhana. And so this is going through the that he went through the various jhanas. I'm going to skip past these just in the interest of time. So he's going through the four jhanas. So doing this, right? What happened first? He discriminated between the two types of thought. He abandoned the unskillful. He kept the skillful, and his mind became the hindrances were subdued, and he went into jhanas. And then he goes into the knowledges, the three knowledges before awakening. I recollected many kinds of past lives with features and details. This was the first knowledge, which I achieved of the night. Ignorance was destroyed and knowledge arose. Darkness was destroyed and light arose, as happens for a meditator who is diligent, keen, and resolute. When my mind became immersed in samadhi, I extended towards the knowledge of death and rebirth of sentient beings. This was the second knowledge. My mind became immersed in samadhi. I extended it towards the knowledge of the ending of defilements. I truly understood the Four Noble Truths. Knowing and seeing this, like this, my mind was freed from the defilements. I understood. Rebirth has ended. The spiritual journey has been completed. What had to be done has been done. There is no return to any state of existence. See how powerful this practice is? That was the third knowledge. Suppose that in a forested wilderness there was an expanse of low-lying marshes and a large herd of deer lived nearby. Then along comes a person who wants to harm, injure, and threaten them. They close off the safe, secure path that leads to happiness and open the wrong path. There they plant domesticated male and female deer as decoys, so that in due course the herd of deer would fall to ruin and disaster. Then along comes a person who wants to help and keep the herd of deer safe. They open up the safe, secure path that leads to happiness and close off the wrong path. They get rid of the decoys, so that in due course that herd of deer will grow, increase, and mature. I've made this simile to make a point, and this is what it means. An expanse of low-lying marshes is the term for sensual pleasures. A large herd of deer is the term for sentient beings. A person who wants to harm, injure, and threaten them is the term for Mara, the wicked. The wrong path is the term for the wrong eightfold path. Miccha, there's the Adyo Atangiko Maggo, and there is the Miccha Atangiko Maggo. Wrong view, wrong thought, wrong speech, wrong action, wrong livelihood, wrong effort, wrong mindfulness, or wrong immersion. A domesticated male deer is the term for greed and relishing. A domesticated female deer is the term for ignorance. A person who wants to help keep the deer safe is the term for the realized one. The safe, secure path is the Noble Eightfold Path. So mendicants, I have opened the safe and secure path to happiness and closed off the wrong path, and I have got rid of the male and female decoys. Out of compassion, I've done what a teacher should do who wants to what's best for their disciples. Here are the roots of trees. Here are the empty huts. Practice jhana. Mendicants, don't be negligent. Don't regret it later. This is my instructions to you. That is what the Buddha said. Satisfied, the mendicants were happy with what the Buddha said. So start doing this practice. And eventually you too will become awakened. So let's move on to the next one, the second sutta. This is Majjhima Nikaya number 20. If you're following along on the Sutta Central, on the very bottom of the screen, you can see the next one. You can click the arrow and go to the next one. This Bhante Sujatu has this translated as how to stop thinking. I think Bhikkhu Bodhi has it as removal of distracting thoughts, right? Yeah. Yeah. So essentially, this is how to deal with those unskillful thoughts that arose before, and they didn't just go away, right? So I have heard at one time the Buddha was staying near Savatthi in Jeta's Grove, Anathapindika's monastery. There the Buddha said, addressed the mendicants, "Mendicants, venerable sir," they replied. The Buddha said this: "Mendicants, a mendicant committed to the higher mind should focus on 5 foundations of meditation from time to time." What 5? Take a mendicant who is focusing on some foundation of meditation that gives rise to bad, unskillful thoughts, connected with desire, hate, and delusion. That mendicant should focus on some other foundation of meditation connected to the skillful. As they do, those bad thoughts are given up and come to an end. Their mind becomes still internally, it settles, unifies, and becomes immersed in samadhi. So this is the first thing, right? You have unskillful thoughts, try to replace them with skillful thoughts. And so the Buddha gives a simile. It's like a deft carpenter or the apprentice who'd knock out or extract a large peg with a finer peg. So you have a peg in a wooden wall, and you want to replace that with another peg. So you take the peg again, the new peg against the other one, you use the hammer, boom, the old peg is extracted, the new peg is in place. So that's replacing unskillful thought with skillful thought. You should focus. Maybe you should focus on, you have unskillful thought and you can focus on some other aspect of the teaching that might counteract that. You should focus on some other foundation of meditation connected with the skillful. And to the second one. Now suppose that mendicant is focusing on some other foundational meditation connected with the skillful but bad, unskillful thoughts connected with desire, hate, and delusion keep coming up. They should examine the drawbacks of those thoughts. These thoughts are unskillful. They're blameworthy. They result in suffering. And as they do, those bad thoughts are given up and come to an end. Their mind becomes stilled internally, it settles, unifies, and becomes immersed in samadhi. So again, this is reflecting on, the Buddha wants us to investigate all experience in such a way that we investigate 3 things: the gratification, the danger, and the escape. We understand that these things give us gratification, so we need to understand and reflect on that and investigate that mindfully. So then we know how we're trapped. Then we reflect on the drawbacks. That's what this word is here. The downside to it. You get angry and you reflect, this anger is really heavy in my mind. I just, usually I end up taking it out on my family members or friends. It causes lots of suffering. And as you're reflecting on that downside over and over and over and over again, then oftentimes naturally that will be the impetus for it to start to fade away. This is a mindful practice of reflecting on the downsides of these thoughts and actions. As they do, those bad thoughts are given up and come to an end. Their mind becomes stilled internally, it settles, unifies, and becomes immersed in samadhi. Now the simile. Suppose there was a woman or a man who was young, youthful, and fond of adornments. If the carcass of a snake or a dog or a human were hung around their neck, they'd be horrified, repelled, and disgusted. In the same way, a mendicant should examine the drawbacks of those thoughts. So normally, so this is somebody who's fond of adornments. They have nice necklaces or whatever. And then somebody comes along and puts a dead snake or some kind of dead corpse around them. And oh. So the Buddha is the simile. This is basically how you practice. You reflect, oh God, having these thoughts is like having this dead snake around me. Right? This is very unskillful, not very good, not conducive to anybody's benefit, myself or other people's. So why don't I abandon? Now suppose the mendicant is examining the drawbacks of those. And you notice there's a stepwise thing going here, right? So first it's replace, but then you can't replace. So then you're examining the drawbacks. And now, suppose a mendicant is examining the drawbacks of those thoughts, but bad, unskillful thoughts connected with desire, hate, and delusion keep coming up. They should try to ignore and forget about them. And so this is like ramping up the, this is not working. Got to try this. This is not working. Got to try that. That's the sutta here that's being given. They should try to ignore and forget. As they do, the bad thoughts are given up and come to an end. So this is really trying to focus, force your mind focusing on, forgetting about these thoughts in some way or another. Their mind becomes stilled internally, it settles, unifies, and becomes immersed in samadhi. Now the simile. Suppose there was a person with clear eyes, and some undesirable sights came into their range of vision. They'd close their eyes and look away. In the same way, a mendicant, those bad thoughts are given up and come to an end. Now, suppose the mendicant is ignoring and forgetting about those thoughts, right? You're trying to ignore and forget, but bad, unskillful thoughts connected with desire, hate, and delusion keep coming up. They should focus on stopping the formation of thoughts. As they do, those bad thoughts are given up and come to an end. Their mind becomes stilled internally, it settles, unifies, and becomes immersed in samadhi. Now the simile. Suppose there was a person walking quickly. They'd think, why am I walking so quickly? Why don't I slow down? So they'd slow down. So instead of, you see here, this is gradually trying to ramp down your thoughts to abandon that unskillful thing, right? To move towards not thinking, abandoning your thoughts. Why am I walking so quickly? Why don't I slow down? They slow down. They think, well, why am I walking so quickly? Why don't I slow down? They slow down. They think, why am I walking slowly? Why don't I stand still? So they'd stand still. They think, why am I standing still? Why don't I sit down? So they'd sit down. They think, why am I sitting? Why don't I lie down? So they'd lie down. And so that person would reject successfully coarser postures and adopt more subtle ones. In the same way, those thoughts are given up and come to an end. And now we come to the last resort, the absolute last resort. This is one that's greatly misunderstood by a lot of people. Now suppose that mendicant is focusing on stopping the formation of thoughts, but bad, unskillful thoughts connected with desire, hate, and delusion keep coming up. With teeth clenched and tongue pressed against the roof of their mouth, they should squeeze, squash, and torture mind with mind. Sounds very brutal. As they do so, those bad thoughts are given up and come to an end. Their mind becomes stilled internally, it settles, unifies, and becomes immersed in samadhi. It's like a strong man who grabs a weaker man by the head or by the throat or the shoulder and squeezes, squashes, and tortures them. In the same way, a mendicant with teeth clenched and tongue pressed against the roof of the mouth should squeeze, squash, and torture the mind with mind. As they do so, bad thoughts are given up and come to an end. Their mind becomes stilled internally, it settles, unifies, and becomes immersed in samadhi. So this is an important thing to understand here. This is a last resort. Right? This is not, oh, I have a bad thought arises. What this is doing is using willpower, right? You're using your willpower and all of your might to try to abandon those thoughts. And it's usually because these things are going to lead to really bad action. Like you're going to punch somebody or, sexually assault somebody or something like that. Right? If you did that for every single time you had a bad thought in your mind, you'd have no energy. You'd be doing this all day like this. This is the last resort. This is very important to understand, right? This is to keep you from doing something really bad. You should not be going around all day trying to squash or crush mind with mind. This is not going, as a matter of fact, that would probably lead to lots of, like in the last sutta, that would be very wearisome and I'd be far from samadhi. So this is really a last resort. It's very important to understand this. It's a matter of willpower. Willpower is weak. Willpower, even the toughest, biggest, like Navy SEAL dude who has like the strongest willpower, eventually that willpower goes away. That willpower is exhausted. What you really need is wisdom power. And you gain that wisdom power by observing and understanding. Right? This thought keeps arising and you keep recognizing the gratification, the danger, and the escape over and over and over and over. And as you're doing that, you're developing wisdom. You're developing insight. You're understanding it at such a refined level that it has less and less power over you. And so you don't need to crush mind with mind. You don't need willpower, you have wisdom power. So this is a very important thing to understand. So why don't we finish out the sutta and then we'll have time for questions. So if you have any questions regarding the sutta, if you need any clarifications regarding what we've gone over, you can ask questions then. Their mind becomes stilled internally, it settles, unifies, and becomes immersed in samadhi. Now take a mendicant who is focusing on some foundation of meditation that gives rise to bad, unskillful thoughts, connected with desire, hate, and delusion. They focus on some other foundation of meditation connected with the skillful. They examine the drawbacks of those thoughts. They ignore and forget those thoughts. So this is repeating the various steps. They focus on stopping the formation of those thoughts. With teeth clenched and tongue pressed against the roof of the mouth, they squeeze, squash, and torture mind with mind. When they succeed in each of these things, those bad thoughts are given up and come to an end. Their mind becomes stilled internally. It settles, unifies, and becomes immersed in samadhi. This is called a mendicant who is a master of the ways of thought. They'll think what they want to think, and they won't think what they don't want to think. This is exactly what I was just talking about, mastering the mind. So you can, like, this is, they'll think what they want to think and won't think what they don't want to think. They've cut off craving, untied the fetters, and by rightly comprehending conceit have made an end of suffering. That's what the Buddha said. Satisfied, they were happy with what the Buddha said. All right, friends. Well, so we have these two practices. We have the dividing the thoughts into two types. and the unskillfulness being abandoned simply by being mindful and clearly aware of the unskillful thoughts arising and reflecting on how they'll lead to harm. And then if that doesn't work, you have the successive levels of action in abandoning that unskillful thought. This is something that you can put into practice right now. This is something that you can spend 5 minutes before bed doing this practice. Right? And when you wake up, you can spend the rest of the day doing this practice. When you develop your mindfulness, when you really practice like Satipatthana, and you master that, this is all throughout the day, you can observe everything going on in your mind, right? And you've trained your mind to investigate. You've trained your mind to discriminate and to question. So when when an unskillful thought arises, you just instantly know, oh yeah, I'm not feeding this. I am not acknowledging it. I'm not going to feed it. I'm just going to understand it and abandon it. Let it go. And you have less and less need of those 5 steps. The more you develop your wisdom power, the more you understand. Louisa says, just doing this practice changed my life. Yeah, it was very powerful for me because I read this. I love practical and pragmatic. This is why I love the suttas. And you can just read the suttas and you see the Buddha saying, before I was awakened, I did this. And you say, all right, I'm doing this. And you can just really literally put it right into practice. And it's not some kind of esoteric thing and you're trying to like, well, I have to figure this out and this. No. You can just put it right into practice. These suttas, these are actually I've started like doing, because I want to either write an article or a book about all of the suttas where the Buddha just gives you can start right away and just practice right away. There's probably at least 20 suttas where the Buddha gives, like a lesson like this, like a practical practice that you can do right away. It's very important, very good. Amaranta says, when unskillful thoughts arise, probably it's because we have retribution for it. Could you clarify that for me? I don't know if I understand retribution in relation to when unskillful thoughts arise. What you have done is you fed those thoughts in the past, so they came back. This is where dependent origination and not self comes in. Right? You start to realize the deeper you get, the deeper you develop your practice, you start to realize these thoughts aren't me. They're not mine. They're not myself. I don't have to accept them. And then later on, years later, at least for me, it was years, like that was like years and years ago, I started to understand anatta. And then like years later, I realized, oh, well, they're not me, but I actually fed these things. I brought so the simile that came to my mind is like children on a swing. You ever see like the old cartoons or like shows where like you push the children so much that they actually go over and come back, right? So the simile that came to my mind was this thought arose and I gave this energy, I gave this momentum in the past. I pushed that swing of that thought because I really liked that thought. And it came back. Maybe it took a week, but it came back again. And I pushed it again. And I kept giving it more momentum. And it kept getting like centrifugal force. Then it, like if you like pushing like a thing in space and you keep pushing it, and it just keeps going faster and faster and faster and faster. And so I keep pushing it, and it keeps coming back more often, over and over and over and over and over again. And then you realize, well, geez, that's stupid. Why don't I start starving this thing? Why don't I start not giving it any energy? And then it comes back around, and you're like, whoa. And you're like, I'm not touching that swing. I'm not giving it any energy. any attention, anything. What happens? It comes around slower, very minusculely slower. But then as it keeps coming around and you're like hands off, no energy, no attention, no focus, it keeps getting slower. It comes around less and less in the mind, less and less, less and less, until eventually the swing stops. And you fully abandon that unskillful thought. Right? That's the kind of the systematic way that I've observed in my own mind how this works, right? And so as you really start to understand with wisdom and you stop feeding your unskillful thoughts, they lose power. They lose momentum. So Amaranta has a thing here. Probably we desire to think about it. Yeah. Well, this is exactly. We feel pleasure even if the thoughts are awful. We are attached to them. Yes, even if the thoughts are awful, we're I wouldn't say we're attached to them, but we have craving regarding them. The craving or the thirst comes into when it's a pleasant thought, we want to grasp it. And if it runs away, we're chasing after it. And if it's an unpleasant thought, we're pushing it away. Go away. Get away. So we're doing this simultaneously. We're doing this. This is what I call the rat race. This is way worse than the 9-to-5 work rat race. This is the samsara rat race. Chasing after what's skillful and running away from what's unskillful. And all that ever does is just gets us another life. Gets us more suffering. So we want to abandon that. Let go of that rat race. All right. Any questions from people here? Yeah.
So how does guilt and shame and for bring those thoughts into arise? Like things that you never dealt with and never accept. So like that causes guilt or shame. Would that bring those thoughts into questions? Would that bring the thoughts into your mind? When you haven't dealt with something you feel guilty or shameful?
Okay, so the question is when you haven't dealt with something you feel guilty or shameful about it. So in Buddhism we have these two words called hiri and ottappa. And it's essentially connected to that. It's connected, basically, you think about like guilt and shame of doing unskillful deeds, right? In the West today, there's like guilt and shame is seen as kind of like a bad, evil thing. It has like a really bad connotation. And that's not necessarily a good thing, right? Guilt and shame is actually something that's quite good. The problem is when it becomes unskillful, right? So just like anything, even something like compassion, there's an unskillful aspect of compassion, right? There's nothing that's like wholly bad or wholly, well, I don't want to say nothing that's wholly bad or wholly good, but there's a lot of nuance when it comes to these kind of emotion or mental aspects. So when you do have, that guilt and that shame, well, that's kind of telling you, well, you have to do something about it. It's the same thing with anger. Like when you have anger, usually, well, you have to question it first because you might be angry for no real good reason, or you might be angry for a really good reason. Right? So once you investigate and you question it, and then you mindfully understand, you mindfully think, well, what do I do about this? Right? That's the important thing. So oftentimes when these things arise in our mind, it is kind of telling you, you need to handle this, you need to work on this. And so, okay, this guilt and this shame is pointing me towards something I need to work on, something I need to address. And that's okay. There's no need to kind of make it worse. Right? So, okay, I feel I have I'm experiencing these emotions, these thoughts. Maybe they're pointing me towards this. Let me investigate. Let me see. And then as you're doing that, and then you understand the reason why they're arising, then again, they are basically abandoned. They go away. It's kind of like somebody was pointing you towards something. And then once you see it for yourself, they don't have to keep pointing you towards it. You know what to do, right? You work towards it. So guilt and shame, Hiri and Otapa, these are important things to keep us on the right track, right? That we don't want to have any, we don't want to do anything unskillful, anything bad, for fear that we will be thought of badly by others, for fear that we will feel shameful, we will feel guilty, we will feel what you call it? Trying to think of the restlessness and remorse, right? Because like we're worried about, oh, we did something bad to somebody. What are they going to do back to us? These kind of things. So all of these thoughts are often related to some kind of unskillful activity that we've done in the past, right? And so we want to, we're not trying to repress them or suppress. When we're investigating the mind, we're not repressing or suppressing anything. We're observing what arises in the mind. And sometimes we observe judgment. We observe our mind judging us. We observe this guilt. We observe what is arising. We understand it. We want to investigate it, to know it deeply. And again, sometimes it's pointing us towards something we might need to do, sometimes not. But we should understand, because sometimes we have, and people have different personality traits, like different personality. So for instance, like I have like a very high in agreeableness, and very like, if I'm in an altercation with somebody, I'll feel bad and I'll feel like I did something wrong, even if I really didn't do something wrong. Right. So then I've had to be like, okay, let me investigate this. Let me think about this situation. Let me get the perception of a few other people who were in this. And then you're like, oh, wait, no, I didn't do anything wrong. I don't need to feel guilty about this. I don't need to, it's that person probably did something wrong, or it was just a misunderstanding. We don't need to, so if you understand your own kind of tendencies, then you can also have that extra power, that extra wisdom to know, that okay, no, I don't need to feel bad about this. Right? This is just me, like my tendency to feel this way. And in this situation, it's kind of like a faulty circuit. It's actually not accurate in this situation. The same thing with anger. Right? Like literally, you can observe, okay, why am I angry? Some dude I don't know cut me off in traffic, and I'm never going to see them again. What the heck is the point of me being angry right now? Right? Or the opposite. Somebody every day at work keeps harassing me and oppressing me and harming me. Yeah, that's probably something you should do something about, right? So you have that wisdom and that understanding to reflect on that thing that's arising. And then you act according to that wisdom and understanding. Philip. Philip says, so does the Nutriment Sutta, AM 46, function as an extension of this? I would say yes. In that sutta, when the Buddha talks about ahara, right, nourishment, he's almost always talking about it in relation to the hindrances, right? Sensual desire, ill will, sloth and torpor, restlessness and remorse, doubt. Right? And all of these are negative. All of these fit into the suttas that we discussed today. So yeah, I would say, that this is something we have to observe how we're feeding it and how we should starve it. Taruna has a comment that I guess leads to a question. Every day, many times a day, the thought arises, I really need a nap. Often it was a craving for sense pleasure. Sometimes I actually did need that nap. Very good. See, you investigated and saw if you really, it's very good. If this was a swinging child, how would you slow it down? What is a skillful way to hold this craving arising? So if you are investigating and you see, oh, that this is just me wanting to be lazy. This is just me wanting to just, curl up under comfy pillows or something, a comfy comforter and be under pillows, right? If you observe that, you're not tired, you don't really need a nap, that's your craving. That's where you say, you know what? I'm not going to do that. I'm going to abandon that. Right? I have a kind of like what I call like an inner drill instructor and an inner therapist, right? So when I'm kind of being lazy or I'm kind of like, feeling sorry for myself and being stupid, the inner drill instructor will come out and kick my butt. And then sometimes I need compassion and empathy for myself. And that's when the therapist will come out and say, it's okay, go for a rest or whatever. So the Buddha never approves of laziness. Only one time in the whole suttas does he approve of laziness. And so he says, I approve of laziness in a badly expounded Dhamma and discipline. What he means by that is, if there's a teacher that says, go out and kill people, steal, sleep with whoever you want, do all these bad things, the Buddha says that's when you should be lazy. So be lazy in doing bad things. Be not lazy, be energetic in doing good things and not doing bad things. Right? So that's important. And this takes time. Like I talk to myself. That's like I'll recognize, like I will literally say, I see you, Mara. Like, oh, I see you. You son of a blah blah blah. Sometimes it depends on how strong my instructor comes out. But yeah, this is, sometimes like, if you observe the mind, it's often like a child, and sometimes you have to talk to the child like, nice, and sometimes you have to discipline the child. That's the way it goes. Joseph has a question. This will be our last one because we are at time. Thank you, Bhante. Could you clarify what sensual thought is? Is this thought of feeding others sensual thought? It's about food, or it's a thought of renunciation? So yeah, Bhante Sudatsu's translation here is as sensual thought is thoughts of grasping, thoughts of clinging, thoughts of coveting, thoughts of desire, right? As opposed to thoughts of letting go. So when that's what the sutta is pointing towards. I admit I don't think that's the best translation for that, but and we have Florence, who is speaking in Italian. Unfortunately, even though my mother and most of my family was born in Italy, I do not speak Italian, so I can't respond to you. I'm sorry. Firenze. Okay. All right, friends. Well, I think that's it for tonight. Aya Suvijana will be back tomorrow morning for... The cat is coming around the wires again. Aya Suvijana will be back tomorrow morning for more sutta readings. And then tomorrow night, I will be back for monk chat. So if you have any questions related to Buddhism, meditation, monasticism, come with your questions tomorrow night and we'll spend some time answering questions. So friends, Sukhi Hotu, which means may you be well and at ease. Practice well and be well. May you have a spiritually successful and peaceful practice until we meet again. Tina asks, can you explain the anatta? Not now. Tomorrow. Ask me tomorrow and I'll talk about anatta.
Anatta now?